Why are web fonts great? Because I can go from this to this.
OMG.
For years, designers have been very frustrated with web design because they couldn't use all the fonts they had been using for years that we're in love with. All of a sudden, we were trapped in this box where we could only use Helvetica / Arial or Times Roman, or Georgia came along. That was great, but it was still pretty limiting in terms of what fonts we could use. So why is that? Why were we so limited?
I don't want to know.
Well, it's because the designer could only use fonts that existed on the user's computer. We didn't have the ability to include the font as part of the website. So if I had text, I had the basic choices that I thought would be on most of the computers that people were using. Because our job as designers is to communicate and to have our product look the way we want it to look, as well as we possibly can on all the different browsers and computers around the world. And so that meant that, we could specify a really nice font that maybe we had on our computer, looked great on our computer, but the minute somebody else opened it up on a computer that didn't have that font, it would look awful. Well, what web fonts have allowed us to finally do is to use the fonts we want to use. And there's two ways of approaching this. You can upload a font to your own server and then call for that font in your script and saying load this font when the web page loads, and therefore the type will show up in that particular font. You can also have the font exist on somebody else's hard drive, and that's the way we're going to approach it in this class, because we want to be able to use fonts that are free. At least I do. You probably do too.
Yeah.
So in that case, we can use something called Google Fonts. You just go to the Google site and type in an additional /fonts, and you're there. It's not a gigantic selection, but it certainly is a very good selection of hundreds of different fonts you can use in your site. When you are working for real or have a budget, or maybe you're just independently rich, I don't know, you can buy web fonts. But anyway, let's go ahead and I'll show you how to do it. Alright, so here we are at Google Fonts, almost 650 different fonts. A lot of fonts to choose from. So if I just scroll through this, and this will just go on and on and on, it will just keep loading more page the more I scroll down. You can see there's quite a large variety. Something else you may have noticed is that either I'm more famous than you think I am, or I was able to customize the text that it shows me here. I am not more famous than you thought. I did this myself. So if you know what your type is going to be, now if only I was a faster typer, then you can look at the fonts in a way that's going to tell you very specifically if that font is going to work for those words. You can also change the size of them. And so forth. You can have different views. You can look at just a word, you can look at a whole sentence, you can look at a poster version of all the fonts that are available to you, and you can also look at it in paragraph form, which we'll do in just a minute. Now to select these, it's really quite simple. You just roll over it and just say add to collection. And that's it. So let's go back. I want to find one more font. I already have a couple added in here, and I would like to find a font that I can use for a body copy. So I'm going to go over here, and I want to change the all categories to be just sans serif, because I want a sans serif font for this. And then I want to go into the paragraph area and look at fonts that are designed to be used small. So I've already picked one out. It's this one right here, the Montserrat. And now I will just click to add to collection. And these are the three fonts down here at the bottom that I would like to use in my website. And so if I click on this little review button over here, it will show me the different fonts, make sure those are indeed what I want. If I change my mind and don't like something, I can click the X over here and go choose others. But once I'm sure I've got what I want, then I finally click on Use. and it will take me to an area where they very nicely give you some code to copy and paste into your page. And it has very simple instructions over here. To embed your collection into your web page, copy the code as the first element in the head of your HTML document. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to drag over this, copy this, and then I'm going to go back to Dreamweaver. And then once I'm back here in Dreamweaver, I can go up here to the head of my code. Now I tend not to make it the very top element. I usually put it right under the title. But it is important to have it at the top because when a browser looks at your page, it reads from the top down. And you want it to get to this information as quickly as possible because it's telling the browser, go to this location and download these fonts so they can be used on this page. And so you want that to be one of the first tasks so that the font is ready to be used as soon as possible. So I'm just going to insert a little space there and Command V for paste. And you'll see this is a link with a hypertext reference, and it's taking us to the Google font site, and it's saying specifically I want to get these three fonts. There's Bevan, Stint Ultra Condensed, and then Montserrat. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, so you can tell me in class if you think I'm a crude, undereducated teacher. So we're ready to go almost, but if I click refresh now, you're going to see that nothing is changing over here. Well, that's because all I've done is establish a link to those fonts, and I've downloaded them and they're ready to use, but I haven't told the fonts to be used. And so let's go do that now. So I'm going to pull down here, and basically I'm having those three different fonts applied to the three different type elements I have on the page. So Katniss here is an H1 element, is a master of disguise, is an H3 element, and then of course this down here is a paragraph element. I want to define each of those as using a different font, and so that's going to go into the CSS rules. So let's go back to the Google page for just a minute, and you'll see down here at the bottom it gives me these font family properties. And so I would paste this one into the H1 rules, I would paste this one into the H3 rules, and this one into the paragraph element rules. And so I've already copied and put them into the code, so we can go back to Dreamweaver, but this is where I got it from. Okay, so if we go back here, I'm going to look at the H1 rule right here, and you see I have some stuff commented out. So I'm going to uncomment that. And you'll see what I have is this font family property. So font family Bevan. And so that's the font I want to use. But what if the Google font server is down, say? What happens? And so Bevan all of a sudden won't be available. Well, it's a very good idea to have some backup fonts, and these are going to be the system fonts that people might have on their computers. And so this is that multiple comma-separated list that is saying, use Bevan, that's what we're going to download to use, but if for some reason it's not available, then see if the computer has Gill Sans, then Gill Sans MT, not that, okay, Myriad Pro, then Helvetica, Arial, and at the end of this list it's exhausted and just says, give me any damn sans serif you have. Sorry to say sans serif there. So that's what that rule does. So we said, go get this font, and now we're saying, okay, use it for elements with an H1. And then I've also given this a size. I've made it a specific size of 2M. So if I click refresh now, you'll see that that immediately applies that font. Now I am in live view in Dreamweaver. So let me take you out of live view for a minute. So if we just go into regular old view, which is where you're going to be working most of the time, you'll notice that that is not the font that I want, because Dreamweaver is not trying to emulate a browser. So Dreamweaver isn't able to go out to the internet, get that font, bring it in, load it, etc. It's not meant to do that. This is a workspace. But the live view very nicely does do that. It acts as a browser. It's basically using browser software. Of course, ultimately, I always go back and preview this in the browser. Okay, so let's change the H3 font. And so let's see what this looks like. Very nice. Now, if you think I'm a genius that
Yeah.
I actually created everything to be exactly the right size, I actually did a little bit of playing around before this video. That's how I came up with these sizes. And these fonts work together. So you'll see both fonts, even though this is an H1 and this is an H3, are both 2M. They're the same size. But that's because this font over here sets smaller. And so you need to allow and compensate for that. Okay, last thing, let's make the paragraph element here a little bit nicer. And so you'll see not only do I have a call for the font family of Montserrat, there is a font size dictated of 0.9 ems, a line height of 1.7, so it'll space out the baselines a little bit, and then finally a margin at the top of -10. So these fonts up here were taking up more space than I liked and was creating too large of a gap. So by giving this a minus margin, it will close that up a little bit. So let's refresh this now. And there we go. So you can see, if I hadn't have been talking and making such a big deal out of all this stuff, you could kind of do this in about a minute. It's really quite easy. Of course, the time-consuming part is making the design decisions of what fonts you want to use and your layout and all that. But the actual act of implementing web fonts is really quite simple. So I encourage you to use these because it's going to give you a lot more control over your layout. And why be stuck using the fonts that everybody has in their computer? By virtue of them being in everybody's computer, doesn't that kind of make them a little less unique? And aren't you striving to be unique?
Yeah.